welcome back to the Total Podcast. I am your host, Don Mel. Greeted here today by How you doing?
I am doing quite well.
It's good. It's good. I just before we even get to the topic, I'll definitely say I feel like we've gone a lot more chillaxed in the podcast, or a lot more like it doesn't feel awkward doing the intro to this anymore. I'll say that I've gone to that point where it feels natural to kind of just get into the podcast mindset.
It is definitely a different mindset, but it's not really that far off from, say, our entire childhood and adulthood of just talking about Lego.
Yeah, but I can even tell that even when we Skype out, like just normally, like it is different than when we talk on the podcast. Not substantially, but it's different enough. And it's just like I feel like just turning on the mic is just is a natural way for me to kind of start acting in front of a mic now. Not the mic across the way, but the mic on my table.
Bruce Wayne is becoming the Batman.
Exactly. But we're nearing the end of talking about comics, so technically this is the last. Well, this isn't the last one people are going to see that a comic that you basically made, but is the last one that is solely on you, and the last one that I'm actually recording with you based on web comics, because we haven't really gone into much detail about Crossbricks or even Crossbricks for the most part. Like I think we mentioned it a couple times here and there.
Yeah, and this is also going to do mop-up duty for Grandfather's Tale. Mop-up duty is probably the best way to describe
Crossbricks.
Crossbricks, but also this episode. All the stuff that doesn't really fit under the big ones.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. You and Zach Tab both kind of have like a an extra like webcomic for basically other stuff.
Though ironically, his other stuff, extra comic, is where he puts his big stories that are more
Yes.
like stories, whereas my extra one is where I put like all the random odds and ends that are like one-off comics.
Yeah, basically, you're randomly assembled essentially.
Pretty much. That wouldn't be a terrible way of looking at it.
At least the ones that you can't weave into Actors on Breakfast News, because that does have its fair shares of random.
Yeah, I mean, Aquazone Breakfast News, we talked about it in the other one, is sort of the anti Grandfather's Tale and therefore the anti Android Files. When I wanted to get away from the epic and dramatic and long story, I went to Android Files. Or, sorry, I went to Aquazone Breakfast News. But I said I was going to talk a little bit about Grandfather's Tale, and I'll start there because that was the first comic, and I have talked sort of about it a little bit, sort of in terms of where it sat as sort of the forerunner of Android Files, but it was also um, it was unique compared to what came later because unlike the other ones, it has a frame to it.
A set story with a beginning, middle, and end.
Well, we never got the end, so we're sort of somewhere in the middle, maybe pushing towards the end. No, what I'm referring to is the fact that there's a narrator, which Android Files has a couple of little call-outs now and then where I'll put later or the next day on it just to indicate the passage of time. But Grandfather's Tale had a full-blown narrator and an audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's called Grandfather's Tales, so it's kind of in the name.
Well, that could have just been, oh, well, it's a castle story from old days.
I mean, yes, but it does. Let's be honest, it lives up to its name more than most of the other comics do. Because Android Files, yes, the first like chapter and whatnot is based on, but for the most part, it's a little bit of a misnomer or misleading. An older one, you got like Crossbricks, which is more just a generic name rather than really letting you believe what actually it is. Okay, I'll admit Zach has stories where I'll tell you exactly what you're in for. I'll grant him that.
Yeah, he might be better at that than me. For example, Aquazone Breakfast News no longer has Aquazone or breakfast or news in it. So it's slightly misleading, if at least somewhat memorable.
I will. This is a slightly unrelated, but Robin Hood's old Lego blog that he had a long time, musings of a wandering sort. I'm pretty sure that sums up a lot of our Lego comics blogs and such way better than anything else ever could.
Yeah, if nothing else, we all sort of have needed somewhere to just throw the random crap that's not big enough to have its own home, but amused us for a minute or two, and that's what Crossbricks is for me. Um, anyway, I guess we seem to keep drifting towards Crossbricks, so maybe we'll just talk about Crossbricks. And um, although what I was going to say about Grandfather's Tale is that you could tell it was an earlier attempt because I didn't know how to tell the story with pictures yet, really. And the pictures, especially in the earliest chapters, are very bare bones. Like there's a lot of you can see my bedrooms from those different eras quite a bit,
Yeah, there's
which is
also a lot more, exposition text on them, I'd say. But again, it is a story with a narrator, so you can kind of get away with that.
and I've always been a little bit prone to a ton of exposition. I don't have a narrator in Android Files or Amazon Breakfast News, so I just get around that by having the characters narrate things when
I
I
mean, that's
need
the
to.
whole point. I mean, let's be honest. You grew up reading a lot of Tolkien, and a lot of stuff's explained in those books. There's a lot of comments. I'm not going to say Tolkien has a lot of exposition, but I do feel like there's a lot of knowledgeable characters who like to explain stuff.
There's definitely a lot of world building, and if we're being super charitable to what I like to do, world building is a good word for it. And Grandfather's Tale is actually kind of funny to look back on because it was the first comic, and in that first comic, I was really trying to just make a clean start. I wasn't going to tell a story that was set in the childhood version of my castle realms. It was going to be something that borrowed from it, but was mostly just going to be new.
Which makes me wonder, could you ever be able to continue it at this point? Because your way of going about making stories, like, would you be able to basically continue it, like, in that same sort of vein? Or would you basically would have to just, like, I don't know. Think you ever could?
It's an interesting question because I've tried, but over the last like 7 years, I've put up 2 chapters, and the pictures for the more recent one of those were taken like 3 or 4 years ago at this point. And just stylistically, it would be. I don't know if I could capture the same using the world as a backdrop element as readily as I did in the past. But that's part of it in a way, but it's also kind of crappy. So it's a good question.
You've got accustomed to a new way of making comics, though, so it's like,
Well,
yeah.
and it was a prototype, and like any prototype, there's stuff that worked and stuff that didn't work and stuff that gets ironed out. And Android Files is the finished product that developed on that prototype. And one of the big developments is sort of getting rid of the narrator. So that cleans up the text a little bit, puts a little more emphasis on the pictures. And also, I moved to having a lot more fake backdrops, which, yes, they can look fake because you're talking about a piece of paper and a piece of paper, but
At least it is a backdrop.
it is a backdrop. It's a little
It's not, you
impressionistic.
can't see the bed with your lamppost in the background.
No, you can't.
I think pretty much all of us have had suffered with that. Even when we have small pictures, every now and then you'll just see that any like with I know recently in A Pirate's Life, wide shots of a lot of boats, you just see the corner of a room there. It's like so close.
Yeah, I've become, especially with Android Files, more adept at cropping out the corners and making them the color of the sky.
I've always been the type, if I have enough of the picture that I can just shrink, like basically just crop the picture a tiny bit, like not like cropping out the background, but just cropping the picture so it's like zoomed in on a tiny part of it, so I just avoid the other section.
Well, that's easier to do when you only have 1 or 2 characters in frame, but as Android Files has come to have, when you've got 6 or 7 of them lollygagging around all the time, the up and the down may not match the side to side. And with Android Files, I've tried, especially since about season 4, to have the same dimensions of every photo. I was a little looser with it in the early seasons, and certainly with Grandfather's Tale. So I could just make it a narrow, wide picture if that cropped out what the problem was. Um, but I've moved away from that a bit. And another thing where Grandfather's Tale, like I was saying, it was developing its own lore. That was actually true of Aquazone Breakfast News. Not that there's a ton of continuity there, but wherever there is, it's not
It
out
was
of
a
any
distinct
original lore.
universe than your childhood games.
It's not the same universe, and that's sort of my point. And even Android Files, when it started, was going to do what Grandfather's Tale did. It was just going to do it with town, and it was going to be a little more laid back about it.
Yeah, as us have noticed that it hasn't quite gone that way. I mean, it has, but it hasn't.
Yeah, well, yeah, like the laid back element's not there anymore. I've become very serious about Android Files, and it is a different canon than my childhood in the sense that I've taken the childhood and I've cleaned up elements of it and smushed some stuff together and moved some stuff around, but now it is the canon. So,
Basically, look at the childhood as your early drafts of this universe.
yeah, that would be one good way to look at it. Or one could look at it another way and say that Android Files ate my childhood universe, just swallowed it whole.
That's not complete untrue. But talking about Android files in relation to Crossbricks got me remembering something because you were mentioning, like Crossbricks are the dumping grounds for stuff that don't really fit anywhere else. And one of the more interesting parts of that is actually I would say your first Halloween special.
Yeah, so it's almost going about things completely backwards with Crossbricks to start with that, but we'll start with it anyway. So for two Halloweens now, not coincidentally, but quite deliberately, these are the two Halloweens that have fallen in the COVID era. I've made a an Android Files Halloween special, and it's the one story I've made that's in the Android Files canon. Like it's completely in continuity with Android Files, but nothing in the two stories have anything to do with each other. So I didn't put it on the main Android Files website, which was a
Horrible Netflix shows, they're part of the MCU, but really don't affect it at all.
yeah, like the Halloween specials are Agents of Shield, which are not going to be acknowledged in the MCU movies.
Nope, nope. But I just was thinking of that because like also those were again didn't quite fit with the Android files narrative and would have felt out of place. So you put them in your dumping grounds,
Yeah,
Crossbricks.
and doing that was sort of the real point where I was like, okay, Crossbricks is not its own thing. Crossbricks is just a casserole, or it's just a whole bunch of stuff thrown together.
It's what you found in the fridge when you need to go shopping.
When I started, I had sort of a different idea for it. So I started it back when I was still updating my blog. So Grandfather's Tale went up on my blog every now and then, and every Saturday I put up an Aquazone Breakfast News, and I had a bunch of other Lego stuff. Yeah, so Crossbricks started as more content for the blog, and it was uh, I wanted to do. I was already sort of chafing a little bit at okay, Aquazone Breakfast News is fun, but it's always the same. It's always Lucian and Alex. It's a lot of the Aquazone studios. So it was just an easy way, take random minifigures and throw them together and make a one panel gag about it. And I think that was right around when Zactas started randomly assembled. So there might have been some influence there.
It does seem about right.
And the timing wasn't great on that. I started doing that I want to say that it was in the winter of 2013 or the spring of 2013, probably early spring of 2013 around Easter. And at the start of the summer, I started my first full time job and I worked 6 days a week. And that's when the blog kind of died and Aquazone Breakfast News went on its first big hiatus and things were never the same.
Yeah, work does that.
But in the beginning, that was the idea. And in particular, I haven't had the opportunity to talk about my spreadsheets before, but Crossbricks is, in this respect, quite tied to my spreadsheets.
Well, explain what are your spreadsheets and
So I have basically 3 or 4 Excel documents. I have spreadsheets. They are, in fact, spreadsheets, and they are lists. As I've become an adult, my love of Lego has included a love of categorizing my Lego. So I have a spreadsheet that lists every minifig I own. and it's got all sorts of statistics about them, such as where their head is from, so what set did I get them with, where their torso's from, so what set do they belong to now, what faction they belong to. I've got different power ranking things, like how cool, how magical, how nostalgic they are, and then there's an aggregate score. It's And then I've got similar lists for my sets. But the important thing with Crossbricks is that I use that as a tool in the brief period when I was making Crossbricks the way I intended to make it. And I would solicit random numbers
Right.
from you guys, you and Zakta and Ek, to that I would then sort of spit through a randomizer and onto the spreadsheet and find out which 3 or 4 random figs I was going to take a picture of and try and come up with a gag for.
Yes. Those are fine. I kind of forgot that you would randomly get them. It's been quite a while now, apparently.
Well, that was 2013, so we're talking about 9 years ago. And as I said, that era didn't last super long. The blog basically died after that big hiatus. Partly because I never had time to be a blogger again, not even a totally amateur blogger like I'd been then, but also because following Ek and Zakta, I moved the comics to having their own Comic Fury sites.
I mean, as you go.
And so Crossbricks got one just for the sake of putting it on there, but it never really got any more content. In 2017 or so, I did start taking a lot more Lego pictures. This was related to my Star Wars revival that we talked about with Aquazone Breakfast News. And so at around the same time that the first stirrings of Aquazone Breakfast News coming back were coming, I'd started trying to take a Lego picture a day. I put some minifigs in my pocket when I went to work, and after work, while I was waiting for my wife to come and pick me up, because we were still a one-car family, I would take a picture of my minifigs in the snow, at the restaurant, as I was walking over. Yeah, wherever it was available. Then I got a second car, and I still was doing that for a while into the spring. But those pictures, I'm like, well, I need to do something with them. So I was putting them up on Flickr for a while. And I've used some of those and pictures like that over the years since then to put up a few more random style Crossbrick one-offs in the vein of the original ones. There's also been a few narrative Crossbrick stuff where I took a bunch of pictures sort of in an Aquazone Breakfast News style, but with nothing to do with Aquazone Breakfast News. So there was some pictures like of the green Dragon Knights and the red Dragon Knights interacting,
You did?
or there was a whole series where I got some new minifigs. I went to the Lego store and I built some minifigs in the Build-A-Fig section. So I had 3
Those I
minifigs,
do remember.
and I brought them home, and then I made a short comic where they get met by Dr. Freestyle, who's my oldest true minifig. And that sort of started a little series where they popped up here and again. And that sort of led to the first time that Zakta came down from Canada to visit after my wedding. There was sort of a big gap where we didn't have any visitors from Canada. It was just me going back to Canada. But Zakta came down to visit in it was 20. It might have been 2017. That very significant. Yeah, I think it was. It was right before my first Lego convention, which was the same year as the Star Wars revival. So Zakta comes down and he brings some of his Lego because it's just cool. I'll bring some of my Lego. We'll meet
It's
some
what
of
you
your
do. It's what
Lego.
you do when you visit brothers.
Well, it is now partly because of that trip, and so actually no, it was even before that. It was when our Oma died. So our last
Yes.
grandparent passed away. I came up for the funeral, and I brought a few of my Lego figs with me just for the sake of let's have our minifigs hang out. We'll take some pictures, and that turned into a comic in which I put it on Crossbricks because where else am I going to put this?
Yeah.
So basically, Crossbricks is now the story documentation place for pictures taken whenever I visit Canada or one of you guys comes to visit me.
Yeah. Like I said, it's very much just for anything really, and yeah, also a lot of that is going to be just those kind of spur of the moment of you see something and go, I want to make a comic. I don't want to make a story with you, but I just want to make a quick joke because I have a joke for you. Like you had the Rock Raiders with their coffee making machine. That was like a 2 or 3 comics, but it wasn't a one-off, but it was like 2 or 3.
Yeah, that was a very good example of something like that. And
Which I do find really amusing that it was a coffee maker that they were getting. Just if anyone has read the or listened to the Rock Miner podcast, they might know the significance of coffee to my Power Miners and Rock Raiders.
yeah, there was no real thought to it. It was I'd gotten a bunch of used Lego. Last year and the year before have been really good used Lego years for me. I haven't really been into new Lego very much. It's either been trying to find used Lego or buying stuff off Bricklink.
New Lego, but this year I'm definitely going to say Purple Clone Troopers 90th anniversary sets. I'm just saying some minty fresh stuff's coming.
I mean, there is some good stuff, and Lego's making some fantastic sets. It's just as someone who's into like '90s minifig themes,
I feel like most of us just when you get older, you're your our interests are already mostly set up. We're not going to be getting into too many new things. So it's more what hits our nostalgia that's going to get us interested in stuff.
that's definitely a part of it. And also, too, as big a Lego fans as we aren't quite the buy every single cool new set when it comes out type of fans. They exist. We are a rung or two down from that, as advanced as we are.
We're selective in our buy all the sets sort of way. There'll be like a selective theme here and there that we might now and then buy all the sets. I think the last wave of sets that I bought all of them to were the Star Wars, was it 20th anniversary of the Star Wars sets? Yeah, those 5 sets.
Oh, I wanted all of those, but I just couldn't bring myself to shell out $150 for a slave one.
I was feeling just rich enough around that time that I was able to do it, and I don't regret it. That was a nice slave one.
It does look very pretty. Although I will say I do like the new little one that they've come out with, if only because it's closer in scale to the original 2000.
Well, it's pretty much the same scale as the 2001, I think.
Yeah. Anyway, I got distracted. So
Naturally.
the Rock Raider one that entertained you was literally just me grabbing a hunk of set out of a bunch of used Lego that had a coffee cup on it, as well as 3 or 4 figs that I had in my bucket to take pictures of. Because in addition to having the spreadsheet, I also have what my wife calls the boxes, which are pictures. I've taken a picture of every single minifig I own and cropped it into a box and put that onto its appropriate sub themes
Yes,
picture.
I'm aware of those. That's more my style of cataloging stuff. If anyone's ever seen all my folders on my computer, there's a lot of visual documentation of stuff. I like that way.
It is one of the things that I started doing in the gap between grad school and working, what I like to refer to as my illegal immigrant phase. Technically, my student visa ran out in May, and I got married at the end of June, and I didn't have a visa until November. So technically, once my 90 days as a visitor in the States ran out, I was an illegal immigrant. It's a good thing we use fake names on this podcast. You never know when someone
You
might go
never know.
digging through
You'll
it.
never know who he is, U.S. government.
But so at that point, I had plenty of time and not a lot of money. So it was a good hobby for me. But it's something that I've kept up ever since, taking pictures in batches.
I think it also helps that you usually end up getting like new figs in a slow enough pace that's not too much of a cumbersome to update your stuff. Usually.
Usually. The used Lego has been a problem there because I've gotten like the 10 gallon or 15, 20 gallon, whatever they are, giant Tupperwares full of used Lego.
Yeah.
Not too many times, but I think it's like 3 or 4 or 5. No, not as many as 5. Probably like 3 or 4 times at this point. And the ones that and a couple of times there's been more than one to choose from, and I'm like, I'm not dropping $150 in Lego today, but I guess I can do 75. So I picked the one with more minifigs, of course.
I have noticed a certain trend almost in at least some of us basically when we get new Lego, it often basically makes us want to make comics in a lot of ways. Because at least for like also you were saying at Crossbricks, a lot of these are basically from the sounds of it, you basically get some new Lego, maybe make a quick comic or something, and like I made a little short comic series where I just gone some old like a monster studio sets off Bricklink, and I made some quick comics, and then that was it. And then pretty much like even in this newest crossover championship we're doing, the major set pieces in the first two tasks were both relatively new sets I got, and they were like the first chance I really got to essentially play with them because I'm an adult now. I don't really play with Lego in the same way I used to.
Yeah, I think that it was Zakta who first mentioned it on the podcast, and he's right that we justify buying Lego now by, oh, I can use that in a comic.
Well, specifically you, I would say specifically you and Zach Tab both are like that. I'm still a crazy enough collector that I just being in a collection is enough for me. Just look at my Bonko closet.
Yeah, it's not a universal, but there's definitely been a trend in that direction, and especially for me.
It was funny actually. It was almost in the reverse when I got the Dragon Fortress because I'd already been postponing making the January's comics, and I was like, well, if I get Dragon Fortress, then I can use it for that, and then I have to do it because if I delay it longer, I feel guilty getting it because I did have X help with acquiring it. So I think there was that slight idea that okay, when you get this, you can now start working on those comics. A little bit of guilt can go a long way. It's not a bad thing.
Definitely for me, as my Lego space in the basement, unfinished basement, dark area, lots of cobwebs. It's sort of about, I can accommodate more, but I can't accommodate like hundreds and hundreds of dollars more every year. It's not going to fit. So in that respect, I'm a little bit more selective, and it kind of does come down to, is this useful? Useful being determined as, does this hit my nostalgia button for the 90s, and therefore will I want to make a comic out of it?
Yes.
Used Lego has been really uh, generative that way because it's sort of like, ooh, it's throwing the unknown into a story and seeing what happens almost.
Yeah, yeah. With our side tangents, I've come to the conclusion that Crossbricks is not only a spin-off from Android Files. It's not only also the leftovers from Amazon Breakfast News. It's not just cataloging. It is basically every kind of whim of Lego you have that doesn't fit anywhere else. Weasels is way into Crossbricks because even like because you've been in a bit of a Bionicle resurgence, but that hasn't had anywhere to go. Well, congratulations. Crossbricks is the place for you.
Yes, yes, it is. It's sort of in the vein of something similar to the Rock Raider comic that I made. It was just a bunch of pictures taken with Taraga Duma, and
I'm not gonna lie, I really want to see where that was going.
it wasn't going anywhere. It was just,
And okay, I really shouldn't be surprised because both the Bongo story I wrote recently with Karipe and those Halloween comics I made, both of those started as a single chapter and or comic that had no intention of going anywhere. So I really can't expect any more from anyone else.
yeah, and you should definitely never expect it when it lands on Crossbricks. The one exception to that is maybe the fact that Crossbricks has sort of taken over from Aquazone Breakfast News as my
Advent.
advent calendar comic of choice.
So the last thing that Aquazone Breakfast Noon had going for it is now basically left.
Yes, although Aquazone Breakfast News has still had daily comics in Advent, it's just become the crossover Advent comic. And we'll see. I think this year might be the year I don't do both of them, but it's also March right now, or April by the time this goes live, and I could change my mind. But no, the last 2 years I've done my Advent calendar, quote unquote, in Crossbricks using what I call the Townland Jedi. And the Townland Jedi are sort of perfect for Crossbricks because they are sort of a cool random idea that doesn't really fit in my
They
canon.
kind of feel like the grandfathers of all your fig barks. Like they were the first true fig barks, I feel like, in your collection.
I don't know if they were the true first ones, but
They're the ones that, well, okay, look at this way, they're still around.
they definitely go back to the very first days after the Great Take Apart. Um, Basically, I took apart all my Lego except for like two or three select ancient sets, and I took apart all my minifigs. And the first thing I did is I built as large of castle armies as I could. I built castle stuff.
You did have that castle for quite a while.
And then I built as many real space figs as I could. It wasn't very many because I didn't have very many space sets or very many space usable stuff at that point. And I built a spaceship, which still exists, but it has continued to grow and get slightly better over the years.
Oh, the Galactica?
Yeah, well, I guess it is
Or
a
the
galactic.
Majesty?
It's in Android files as the Majestic, and it's been known as both the Majesty and the Galactica. So it's sort of now
Well,
something in
isn't
between.
the other one the Majesty, like the one that had the saucer pieces, like the smaller one that was?
So originally, the Majesty predated the Great Take Apart and was made out of a freestyle creator bucket, and the name, which was the direct predecessor of what is now the Galactica. But because I didn't want to just steal the name from Battlestar Galactica for the comic, I went backwards and stole the name from myself, so it's now the Majestic.
The extra layers of thievery. Brilliant.
Yes, yes. So in doing that, I may have displaced the name Majesty completely. But yeah, so, and after that, I have this compulsion, and this is again sort of related to my Excel spreadsheet. I can't have leftover minifig parts. If I have a head, a torso, and a pair of pants,
And maybe in hand.
I do need hands, yes, and ideally a headpiece or a hair. I am going to assemble them into as many sort of passable minifigs as I can.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck in this non-passable position right now.
Yeah, this is where Evil Peaches actually first kind of came into my Legoverse because I broke down eventually and either was given or bought some sets with Peach parts. Like I had some Clone Troopers from the Clone Wars era, and I had some Batman sets, and then Indiana Jones came out, and
The one with the griff, like with the one with the hippogriff. I know that was one of your earliest Peach sets,
yeah, and that one I bought deliberately because I wanted that evil Draco face.
and the hippogriff was cool too.
And the Hippogriff was cool too. So I had a few Peach parts, and the doors have just become wider. But after you strip out the parts that you bought the set for, you're left over with extra minifig parts. And for a while, I did kind of have the ambition, well, I'll just buy yellow hands and heads on Bricklink to replace them. That eventually proved untenable. And so some figs have Peach parts on them, and that's sort of the real origin of the evil Peaches that have so plagued Aquazone Breakfast News all these
Well, it
years.
didn't help that pretty much all the Peach heads we had originally were pretty much just Peach versions of yellow heads, so also just their evil twins.
That wasn't a huge consideration for
I'm not sure
me.
if that was an actual consideration or just something in the back of the head, because also you have a Draco face. Oh, but then we have a Peach one, also evil. Oh, a Peach Harry Potter. He must be evil. I don't know. Like I said, I don't think it was an actual thing that majorly affected it, but maybe that was just my interpretation.
I mean, it's not a terrible interpretation. But I don't think for me or for the Lost Toa that it was a particularly large one. I think we were more, this doesn't look natural. Where is the yellow that our minifigs are supposed to have? And still sort of at the tail end of how do we work every new theme that Lego comes up with into our pre-existing lore.
Yeah, even as kids, we were obsessed with lore.
Yes, it is our greatest strength and our greatest weakness.
I would say it's the greatest challenge per se. But I'll definitely say that Crossbricks, and then like in some regards, Zach has Sword of Tales, which we haven't gone around and talked about yet, are both really good ideas to have a comic where you can just kind of do whatever, because I only have the one comic, and I have made other comics. Like I have made a one-off Bionicle comic. I've made a one-off comic that's a parody of Acquisition Breakfast News and would want to do sometimes more of them, but I don't want to do a full comic about them, like a full comic series. And then I said I made the Studios monster comics, and I'm like, I don't have any place to put any of these because Rock Miners is a lot less flexible than a lot of, like, let's say, like Fez or Pirate's Life, I'd say. And you two have definitely taken the good idea of having basically a just a dumping grounds comic for whatever.
Yeah, the worst thing that I did with Crossbricks, which I didn't really know it was going to be a problem at the time, because this was when I was putting it up on blog, was I gave it the name with cross in it. And this means that I'm always getting my folders confused or my statements confused between Crossbricks and Crossover Championship. They're too similar. I would rename it, except that
In fairness, it was Eck who named it Crossover Championship rather than the tournament.
this is true. Mine came first.
Which so I'm like, it is a lot of fun stuff, and it's a very interesting little window into other what other stuff goes on, what goes behind the curtain, what's the grimier part of the Michael of the Fermentakill How One universe. I just went. It took me 3 tries to get that.
Uh, I have too many names and too many
You do have
syllables.
too many names. There's many of them. But so we're at almost the 40-minute mark. So I guess I will start wrapping this up, saying with to the regular 2 questions of, do you have anything that you want to accomplish with this before we end it, and is there an end in sight that you have planned or whatnot?
I mean, they're kind of the same answer, which is no. There's no end in sight, but I mean, I could also never upload anything to it again, because I have no plans or goals for it. It's very much I come up with something new that needs a home, so it gets slapped on there sort of place, which means that in theory it could last longer than all of my comics, or it could die any day. Because there's no continuity, there's no story to wrap up.
It's the Takuta Nuva of comics, light and shadow, death and life.
And like Takuta Nuva, it could fall apart at any time.
Get crushed by a giant door.
Exactly. But I would say it's more likely than not that at least it will last as long as Android Files does, because it's sort of got this symbiotic relationship right now where whenever Android Files is on a short hiatus, like
In between seasons, or
yeah, if there's only a couple of months between seasons or a handful of weeks, I try and make something to go up on those Sundays when I have no content on Android Files. So at least while those gaps are short, if that continues to be the case, then I'm still going to probably be making stuff for Crossbricks. And I would say as long as I continue to have an interest in doing something in Advent, Crossbricks is likely to have a good shot at continuing that, because at least right now I'm not feeling it for Aquazone Breakfast News. So it's the sort of place I'd say, click. I don't promise regular content, but maybe set yourself an RSS reminder so that if something does go up, you'll see it, because you never know.
It's one of those things, like, if you want bonus material from our your web comics, it's a nice little extra thing to go look at, definitely. And as always, there will be a link in the description down below, as I don't think I've missed any links so far. If I have, no one's called me out on it, so I think I'm doing okay with that. But yeah, I hope you guys all liked this podcast. Please consider liking and subscribing. If I get to 100 subscribers, I will bury it in the dirt. No one listened this far into the podcast, but you never know. And yeah, I have been your host, Andrel. This has been the O A Podcast, and we are retiring from the night.